to build global ascension. After lifetimes of trainings, I was led to the feet of Heruti the Sphinx by the priest in the link of the cyclic succession with a secrets deep, being passed to initiates with no form of speech. The vibrations of the masters that were there gathered, made the illusory veil of matter to shatter. The entrance to a mentee lighted by lanterns between the palms, open the cavern and upon the walls, the flower life pattern, glyphs of Venus, Mars and Saturn. We traveled across the desert sands to stand with Abdullah, Tahuti, hand in hand. As the light shine blue and violet, I felt my glands, pineal and pituitary expand. The wheels of my chakra spun to the infinite. Asked by all said if I could become an instrument. Yes, divine mother, I responded intimate. Ma gave me a feather medicine for
the theology of the God principle. Now, this video is intended to just give the intellectual conception of God, because intellectual understanding is the first step. And when our intellectual understanding deepens, we can go beyond the intellect, because the knowledge of God is not found in the intellect. The intellect is a first step. God knowledge cannot be acquired in intellectual ways. For example, if to one who is blind, we may explain, scientifically how colors come about, what light is and what the frequencies of light are, the vibrations which produce colors, and you might even give metaphors like to a blind person, as in blue is like the sound of water being poured into a glass, or red is like the sound of the crackling of fire, or yellow is as the feeling of the sun on your skin, right? And a blind person can memorize this info and repeat it in a clear and concise way. But that doesn't mean the blind man knows what color is, because he has never seen color. He has never experienced color. And it's the same way with the knowledge of God. We can repeat these intellectual teachings, but these intellectual teachings are to teach you to go beyond the intellect. So, let's speak of the God principle, which is in religious doctrines called the Godhead. Okay, the Godhead, many confuse the Godhead with being like a trinity or a multiplicity of beings. But Godhead simply means the highest, the supreme, the head, that which all depends upon. And so there is an omnipresent, unlimited, eternal, unchanging principle or beingness in which no or all thought about it is impossible. It transcends all mental conception. So right there, we will always fail to realize God when we're using words, because it transcends words and thought. Right? And this principle, the principle of principles, or the King of Kings, this principle being omnipresent means it is everywhere. And again, when we're speaking of principle, we're speaking of the ultimate source, or God. This principle is everywhere, penetrating everything. So this means it is as much in you as it is in me. It is much in me as it is my phone, or the tree, or the flower. Right? And in all truth, it's not even true to say it is penetrating everything, because there are no things. This principle is all there is. So when we say words like it is penetrating, or it is omnipresent, or everywhere, This is a concession to the mind of men who thinks there are things independent of it. So when it is said it is penetrating all things, our mind automatically conceives, since we conceive things to be real, that there is something that goes in all things. But that is a half truth. It's a first step to get someone out of the understanding that things are real, to see that this principle is the only reality. Right? So it is as much in good as it is in evil. It is, it is as much in light as it is in dark. Because it is all things, it cannot be only where the good is or only where the dark is or light is. And from the standpoint of this absolute principle, there is no distinction in it. It doesn't distinguish from this and that. Only relative beings do that. Only from a certain point of view can you distinguish this from that. But when this principle being all, it does not make distinctions because it is all. And it is also unmanifested. What does this mean? When I say this principle, the principle of principles is unmanifest. Don't think of unmanifest as existing only in the beginning of time. Like we read in certain scriptures, it'll say, in the beginning there was a void, right? Or nothingness. And so we think when we read this that this means in the beginning of time. No, this unmanifested principle is always present, even within the forms or within the manifested. It is present even right now. So when we hear beginning, don't think of beginning as in beginning in time. Think of beginning as in order or rank. And it is always in every moment. Think of the unmanifested as the number 0, right, on the number scale. 0 is not manifested. In the West, we think of 0 as nothing, meaning it just empty, nothing. But in the East, 0 was understood to mean the all, right? It is simultaneously all possibility, all impossibility, meaning the 0 can be 1. Once you put 1 on one side, you get the -1 on the other side, and the source of these two equal to 0. Or you can put 25, but when you have duality, you always get the flip side, which is -25, and these numbers go into 0, 0 as their source, right? So 0 is all impossibility, but none manifested, right? This is what the principle of principles is. And this is why when atheists argue is God don't exist, because it is nothing. Even the Buddhists say that the first or the absolute principle is no self or nothing. But then you'll hear other traditions say it's the self or something, the all, because 0 incorporates both the all and the nothing. That's why it's hard to explain. When one says God is the all, well, what about the nothing? See, and when we say God is nothing, well, what about all? So it's hard to put the absolute principle into words. So when we hear beginning, think of rank, not time, okay, or order. Think of the unmanifested as the foundation, because the unmanifested is present in all manifestations at all time. This is the foundation of all things in existence. So when we speak of God or this principle as being eternal, that means it's outside of time. which means there's no death. There's no beginning. There's no end to it. It always is. This unmanifested. See, we from the human point of view only know the manifested because the mind can only know things manifested. But these things come forth from the unmanifested. And you are the unmanifested. This absolute principle is also said to be changeless. No beginning, no end, no variation, no coming, no going. Always the same. No growth, no decay, no evolution at the point of the supreme principle or the supreme beingness. Because evolution only happens at the level of things, right? This absolute principle is also said to be unlimited, meaning it is not limited by anything that is manifested. It has no bounds. So the ultimate principle, being omnipresent, it cannot have bounds. Being eternal, it cannot have bounds. Being unchanging, it cannot have bounds. And so whenever we realize this absolute principle that cannot really even be spoken of, when you realize it, you'll see eventually it's even difficult to transmit in words to others what this principle is. Because it is beyond words. It is beyond speech. It is beyond thoughts. This principle is also absolute. That is why it is called the all in some schools. Absolute means the totality of all. It is prior to manifestation. And it is during manifestation. And it will be after manifestation. It always is. It's prior to things that's manifest, during things that's manifest, and will be after manifestation ceases to be. That's why it is called the causeless cause, or the rootless root, or the sourceless source, because it is self-contained. It is the root of everything, yet itself is not rooted in anything. It is absolute, meaning when we even say absolute, the opposite of absolute is relative. But we say it's absolute because it relates to nothing, since it is all there is. But it also entails the relative. This absolute principle, this God principle, the Godhead is also attributeless. And this is why it is hard to speak, because when it's attributeless, we attribute attributes to it when speaking about it, like eternal, unbound, unchanging. So we're only given half-truths. That's why it cannot be spoken of in words. But this principle is attributeless, because if we say something like this principle is good, that means where there is evil, the absolute cannot be there. When we say this absolute principle or God is eternal, right? It is often conceived that this principle is not wherever there is things that come and go or that are passing. But that cannot be, because the absolute principle is the reality of everything and everywhere at all times. So words always fall short. This absolute principle is also what is considered beingness rather than being. Understand the difference. Beingness rather than being. Beingness, it symbolizes the presence of being, and a being symbolizes a limited form. The source is not a being. Beings are limited. Or, in a sense, a being is different from the rest. Like, I am a being different from you. The source is not that. This absolute principle is not that. because many think of God in this way, as being a being separate from other beings. But we see that God would not be absolute in that sense. This absolute principle, being not a being, it allows all beings to manifest. Being beingness itself, it allows what we understand beings to manifest as they are, right? So it is beyond being and non-being, meaning it's beyond being a form as we conceive beings to be, and it is beyond non-being, meaning it is even beyond not existent in a being form as we conceive. It is also beyond consciousness and unconsciousness as we conceive. Now, a lot of times you will hear me say that this ultimate principle, this absolute principle, God, is consciousness, because I find consciousness to be the closest word we can get to in our experience to realize it. But it is beyond consciousness and unconsciousness the way we think of it, because we think of consciousness as being the state of alert and awake, moving. And we think of unconsciousness as being, either passing out or being in deep sleep where there is nothing going on. See, when we say consciousness or being beyond that, it's beyond both of these states. It is that which contains both of these states. So it is inconceivable to the mind. And so whenever we ascribe a word like consciousness to it, people automatically think, oh, well, what about unconsciousness? Does this God die when unconsciousness happens? And again, this principle being pointed to is beyond both of these states. It is what manifests as both of these states. So it is beyond both. And within this absolute principle that is eternal, unbound, unlimited, beingness itself, diversity arises or vibrates within it, which is in essence an illusion. Because in truth, there is nothing but the one principle ever present. But when diversity arises, the one principle gets veiled and all we see is a multitude of things as real. But again, ultimately, this principle is constant whether there is manifestation or no manifestation. It is always there. It is the source of whatever is or whatever isn't. And you can think of it in a way of, think of a pure clay ground, a ground made of nothing but just red clay all around. And out of this red clay, nothing is manifest. But once, let's say, beings or clay figurines start to manifest from it and walk around and collapse in it and keep rising and falling in this pure red clay, whether the beings are there or no beings are formed of it, it is still there. And now this example is a limited example because all examples fall short. But it is to point you to that which is present, unformed, the formless that is simultaneously the formed. And so in the videos that I put out on this channel, I eventually tried to point people to the formless, because we already know the forms, but we have no idea of the formless. And so the theology broken down here in this intellectual way is to just give you the idea of what's being pointed to when God or consciousness or being or existence or principle is mentioned, or the absolute principle is mentioned in any of the videos. So with that, I'll say peace.